We're sitting here ready for another episode of the Mentorship Military Podcast, and my sidekick, Paul.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
And we have been doing a lot of great in-studio shows, and not without problems, definitely.
Yeah, technical advisors.
Yeah, so someone who is joining us now is... we actually sat down yesterday and tried to do a podcast, and it didn't work. Or day before yesterday. See, I've lost my days already.
Time warp.
And yeah, and we're now trying to redo, which is always going to be fun because the first one didn't quite turn out the way we wanted to. As a matter of fact, I think we caught 8 minutes and 44 seconds of a 1 hour discussion before we realized, and we weren't even done. So anyway, John Rain Waters, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
Yes.
Again, it's one of those things. It works out well being the pilot that has to redo it because I get to come in here and talk about myself again. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, so, John, I didn't know this until I probably was about 2 months ago or 3 months ago, and we've been trying to make this happen. Neighbor across the street who also knows John, and I think Kyle knows everybody in the neighborhood. Yeah, and we both live in the same neighborhood, and he happened to mention that, and ever since then we've been trying to pull this together. John has his own podcast and is successful in his own right, and so it was like, it just makes sense for us to get together and for you to talk about your background and history. And one of the cool things, when you got out, or right before you got out, one of the things you did as an F-16 pilot is you started going around and taking the road show and going out with other pilots and everything, but you put the F-16 through the works. And I'd like for you to, kind of talk about that, because I think, most people, that's the closest they get a chance to see, an aircraft like that is through air shows. So, whether it's the Thunderbirds, the Blue Angels, whatever the case may be, that's kind of what you were doing, but in a different level, not necessarily with like Thunderbirds or Blue Angels.
Yeah, my flight suit wasn't fitted. So
is that the difference?
Yeah. I was really fortunate. My last 2.5 years on active duty was being the F-16 demonstration pilot, which involved traveling around all across the globe and flying different air shows. I think all said and done, I flew just over 50, somewhere over 50 air shows, and then a bunch of flyovers and things like that. So incredible opportunity. It's not why I joined the Air Force, but at the end, it was a great opportunity to go out there and showcase what the Air Force has, what it does, and connect with the populace, right? Because like you said, most people will never get to go onto a military base. Most people won't even get to talk to someone or know someone who is in the military. And now that I do recruiting, that's a big thing, right? Mm-hmm. Coming out of World War II and Vietnam, almost half of Americans had some direct relative that served in the military.
Yeah.
Nowadays, it's somewhere like 15, 17%. So to go out and do an air shows is really important to let people know, hey, this is your Department of Defense. This is what it's capable of. And these are the opportunities that are out there for young people who are looking to join and serve a greater purpose than just themselves. So I was fortunate and go put the F-16 through its paces across the globe.
Well, I think what's also nice about that, and the fact that you mentioned recruiting, you guys have been struggling to find recruits, and we kind of hit on this, a little bit off air and on air, but this is where you kind of need Tom Cruise and the movie to come back to help you with that, because everybody, what they've seen is all the ground action, within the war, and they forget that there is, even in some cases, fighter, pilots like yourself that are out there readily and standing by and still training and still doing missions and everything else,
Yeah, it's kind of odd, at least for me, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm slightly biased because I come from the fighter pilot community, but it is one of those things. For quite a while, we've been struggling to fill fighter cockpits. There's a lot of variables that go into it, but like you said, a lot of people don't realize that there are fighters flying around different areas of operation doing the nation's business. So when I was in Operation Inherent Resolve, our unit dropped the most precision-guided weapons of any F-16 unit in the history, right? And then the next unit showed up behind us, dropped even more than us, and the subsequent one dropped even more than all of us. So really busy, but you don't hear or see any of that stuff in the news. And it's just one of those things, again, multitude of reasons of why we are where we are today in our current fighter pilot shortage. But it's one of those things we have to get out there and we have to educate and let people know, hey, there's opportunities out here, and it could be a potentially great career and go serve your country.
Now, do you have difficulty finding recruits because the standards are so high, or because the criteria is so specific?
That's a good question. I think obviously the standards are high. The big thing we say is propensity. So propensity to serve. So, the military has broken down the numbers. We know how many young people are eligible to serve as far as age. You start whittling that down to medical, education, haven't had a felony, don't use drugs. And then you get a very small pool of like 25,000, and then it's propensity to serve. So how many people want to go out there and serve? How many people had a relative, right? And that number has shrunk, as I already mentioned.
That's already the criteria just to find somebody who's interested in the military. But now you're trying to take that population down to at least an F-16 fighter pilot.
Yeah, so it just starts whittling its way down. And it's a complex problem. And I think we talked about it in the previous episode. When it comes to like, hey, you finally get to someone who's in pilot training, we have issues of people who go to pilot training that don't want to be fighter pilots. Like for me, that's all I wanted to go do. But when you get someone who's in pilot training, going through the course, and they're doing well, I'm like, no, I don't want to go do that. And it comes down to, I think there's a lot of misnomers about the fighter pilot community. We can discuss that. It's a lot. It's definitely a lot of work. It's very mission oriented. Some people want to go travel the world, which we have planes that go and do that. In the fighter world, you're really not going to go travel the world. You're going to go travel to a spot in the world, and then you're going to operate in that region for a little bit, and then you're going to come back home. It's just a little bit different. So it appeals to different people.
So why wouldn't somebody want it? Because to me, like, I'm kind of a high-speed guy, and if I was smart enough that I didn't have to be in the Army, like I would look up in the sky, we'd get fast movers overseas. I'm like, man, those guys are the coolest guys.
Yeah, and then you meet me, and you're like, it's anticlimactic.
I should rephrase that. Those guys have the coolest job.
Yeah, exactly. You walk around a fighter squadron and you really see. But no, I think it does come down to, for me, and the advice I always give to young people going through pilot training now is pick a mission set, right? We have different planes that do different missions in the Air Force, just like any other branch, the weapon system we're talking about. The fighter world is very mission oriented. I joined because of a very specific event and what I wanted to do. And there are people, like I mentioned, and again, there's nothing wrong with it. Their goal is to go travel around the world or to live in certain spots. And maybe a C-17 is only located at base X, Y, and Z, and they don't want to go live in the middle of nowhere and fly a fighter. And all those things come down to it. But again, for me, it's like very mission oriented. That's where I find I get a lot of fulfillment from, and probably, Paul, you're the same with that. So I think, again, everyone just kind of ticks a different clock.
Now, there's some misconceptions, I think, or some preconceived notions, like you have to be under a certain height to be a fighter pilot. You have to have perfect vision. You have to have like some physical criteria that I think people disqualify themselves from. Like, do you have to be under a certain height?
So that's
have perfect vision.
That's a good question. So I think the eyesight is one that really has gotten people, at least initially, who haven't dug a little bit further. Yeah. So correctable to 20/20 is a requirement. And then I have a lot of buddies who've had LASIK and PRK surgery to correct their vision.
That's a key. That's a correctable too.
Right.
So a lot of people, I think you're right, disqualify themselves because they think 20/20, not correctable to 20/20.
And even if you're not, I think 20/70, again, don't write etch this in stone just yet, but 20/70, correctable to 20/20. So if you're wearing contact lenses or glasses, good to go. Colorblind that's going to be a showstopper. Yeah, you need to see colors. And then there are some things, if you have like a heart murmur, it's going to be a showstopper. One thing I tell people, especially on my podcast, I've had several guests, and it's funny, without even asking them, it's come up in the episode where they weren't medically qualified to even commission as an officer, so they couldn't even go to pilot training.
Which is a whole nother thing, yeah.
Yeah, but they got a waiver, right? There's typically a waiver to everything.
Everything, yeah.
Again, there are some showstoppers, right. But I say never take no for an answer, right? You at least need to dig, at least ask the question, and probably ask a couple people respectfully and get some other opinions, because you just never know. There's always some different avenue. And actually, funny story, I showed up at ROTC, 30 of us, and one semester, a guy who's probably the most diehard, I'm going to be a pilot, this is all I've ever dreamed of, leaves ROTC. He has asthma, so disqualified. And then fast forward 5 years later, I show up to pilot training. He's sitting there checking in, and he found a guard unit that would hire him, send him through another medical. Turns out he doesn't have asthma, but he didn't take no for an answer. He found another path.
Okay. Yeah, there you go. So what is the height requirement?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. I mean, we have academy. Granted, it's not like Division I football, but not SEC football players, but we got football players who fly fighters, in the Air Force. Most of those guys find their way to the A-10, but I feel like I was cramped in the F-16 with not a whole lot of space remaining. And there were guys who were 3 or 4 inches taller than me and definitely had like 20, 40 extra pounds. Now flying like in a combat, there's literally no room with the vest.
Yeah.
So I don't know how those guys fit in the jet, but it's possible.
Is there something to do though, like from the torso to the, that type of thing too, inseam or whatever?
It's a sitting height. And there is a specified regulation that breaks it down. And what it comes down to is the fact that you need a certain amount of space between the top of your head and the canopy should you have to eject. So,
that's what it is.
Yeah. So you need to be able to physically fit in there.
I thought it was to reach like pedals and stuff like that.
Is there a reason for that?
Yeah.
I'm sure at some point, and actually I had a good friend, she now flying the F-35 is 5'3", 5'2". So she went through F-16 training with me, really short, really small. You always knew when she was flying the jet before you because the rudder pedals were pulled all the way forward and you couldn't get in the jet.
They don't have the little buttons that says this is I'm in, and then when you do it, everything adjusts for you.
What are we spending our money on? That's what I have to ask.
Heated seats.
Yeah, exactly.
Air conditioning.
Yeah, we'll talk about air conditioning later. But she transitioned F-35. She was actually delayed transition F-35 for a year because they came out and said, hey, if you're under a certain body weight, which I think was 130 pounds, if you ejected, a very high probability you'll be decapitated. So they went and they fixed that issue, and then she was able to go onto it. But there's reasons. Like it's a very, flying fighters, I think definitely takes a lot of work, just like any kind of mission set. And we try to mitigate the risk and fly them as safe as possible. But at the end of the day, it's a weapon system. It's designed to go kill and break things. And you have to respect it because it can very quickly go south on you. And then just wouldn't be a good day.
When you were doing the air shows, would you say, I'm just curious, between that and say your typical, typical day as an F-16 pilot, would you say you put the aircraft and yourself through more frequent, if nothing else, challenging experiences in order to demonstrate the capabilities?
It depends, right? Most guys who fly the F-16, it's a 9G platform. Up until going to be an air show pilot, I pulled 9Gs like once.
Mm-hmm. That's what I wondered.
I just touched it, right?
Yeah.
Because when you're going out there and you're fighting one another, you're typically not pulling 9Gs. So as far as Gs go, it's much higher risk doing the air show, in my opinion, because you're down low at 200-300 feet. You're still, you're going as slow as 115 miles an hour, which is not where you want to be in F-16 should you lose a motor, and you're going 600-700 knots. So if you hit a bird going that fast, it's not going to work out well. Or if you G-lock, so G-induced loss of consciousness, there's no time to recover. And we're also not flying with an auto GCAS, which is our auto ground collisions avoidance system. So it's giving you that last glove save should you G-lock flying around. So there's definitely high risk. Now, if you're going to go fight into a near peer country with other fighters and enemy air defenses, that's much more high risk than flying air shows for sure.
Yeah.
Near peer meaning aircraft that are comparable to ours.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking like China or Russia, right? They have fighters, they have surface air missile systems that are very robust, and fighter pilots that go through training. They're going to present a challenge, and it's going to be a little bit of work for sure.
I don't know if I'm allowed to ask, how comparable are these systems? Like how on par with them? I think we perceive our air power as being the best in the world, the most advanced, and nobody's really that close to us. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of material out there about this, and a lot of people that have spoken about it, especially generals, because it's one of those things, in my humble, lowly opinion, right? We've been in uncontested environments for the past 20 plus years where no one's really shooting at us. Syria, like you probably can just maybe a slight, very small asterisk. But we have freedom of the skies, and we're not used to not having freedom of the skies. but there are adversaries out there who are spending a lot of money, and they're very technologically advanced, and they're producing some capable people, some capable equipment that would present significant challenges. And it goes back to, the F-35 when it was coming online was just getting so much grief in the media. People would say, well, it's a terrible close air support platform. It can't replace the A-10. Well, that's not what it's designed for, right? Like, will it fill a mission set that the A-10 did eventually, doing close air support? Absolutely. But an A-10 can't go survive in downtown Moscow or wherever, right? You need an F-35 to go out there and fight a near-peer adversary.
Right. The A-10's not going to get there.
Right. Yeah, it's so slow. It's so slow for all my A-10 buddies that are listening. So slow.
And not just the speed, but the technology. You can only patch in so much new technology into the old airframes. I'm guessing.
Absolutely. And, it's obviously a very capable and very robust platform and does incredible work. And I know coming from the ground, right? Like that's everyone wants to see the A-10 show up.
That sound,
right? Like it's an awesome plane. I want to shoot the gun.
Yeah, I was never sad to see it coming.
Right? Yeah, right. Yeah.
I was like, that thing's old. I was like, oh, sweet, smoke those guys.
This thing is awesome. But the F-16. So the ones I was flying at Shaw, which are Block 50s, are newest F-16s for the U.S. inventory. We're still at Lockheed, still making them. Most of those rolled off the assembly line between like 1990 and 1993. There were a couple 2000 models there, but they're fragged to fly to 2045 at least. And so they're going through constant upgrades. And I can't, I've been out of it for 18 months and, obviously I still have a lot of buddies there, and it is just rapidly evolving. So F-16, they're going to keep upgrading. The next thing, they're going to rip all the cables out of it, rip all the computers out of it. It'll be the same inherent mechanics and jet, right? But all the avionics that go into it that make it able to integrate with fifth-gen fighters, make it a more robust air-to-air fighter, air-to-ground fighter will be there. But, the A-10, it comes to, you can upgrade some things to it, but when it comes to the next fight, it's probably limited as far as what it can do.
Well, it's you're basing it all on 1960s technology, right?
Yeah, it'd be a fun plane to fly, though.
Yeah, it's an awesome plane. I want one.
It's an interesting question, though, because here recently I happened to get around some M1s, and me coming from tanks, and being one of the first to ever transition from M60A3s to M1s was really cool. But then, recently when I was around it and I was asking some questions and got to, get inside a turret and, crank one up and the whole thing, it was like, this really hasn't changed that much. I mean, we went from 105 to 120s, and, some minor modifications inside and stuff like that. But that's 1982 or 83, right? That's a long time ago.
Would you drive a car from 1982?
Probably not.
Even if it had like a new steering wheel and heated seats and upgraded.
Now, there were some that were, the 70s were much better. 80s, you're right. I probably wouldn't. But yeah, but there's a lot to be said about that, especially when you're going out. It's a little bit different to drive. It's another thing to take it to combat,
Well, that's what I mean. Like, I would go drive a 67 CUDA for fun.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think I'd drive it to work every day.
No.
That sounds awful.
Yeah. Well, you certainly don't have all the safety aspects in there, for sure.
It's a big gas bill.
It is, yeah.
That's one thing. I mean, you run the risk, right? And you have to weigh what resources do I have?
Yeah.
What can I allocate? I mean, it's the problem that everyone has.
We'll continue to fight that too, because financially, the defense budget is always something that's target one.
Right.
With especially new regime and everything, they look at where dollars are allocated. They look at that defense budget. We don't have the resources and everything else, and that's not a good thing too when you're talking about our adversaries and capabilities and everything else that are constantly changing, because they're pushing a majority of their money into that.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. Actually, I just read an article this morning. COVID has changed the dynamics, obviously, for everything. The Air Force, I think they've made an assessment that their retention is at an all-time high, right? No one has gotten out, which will then...
Space Force, everybody's,
everyone's jumping there. That's who knows? But what it'll end up being is, I feel like the knee-jerk reaction, right? There's a surplus of bodies, so we'll end up slashing a bunch of people, and then there'll be a deficit. And one thing, right as I left F-16, fighter pilot shortage had been ongoing, and then a maintainer shortage. And how long does it take to create a 10-year, veteran fighter pilot? Well, it takes 10 years, right? And that's, depending on their qualification level, that's probably the tune of $4 to $20 million worth of training that you've invested in this person. And then when they leave, like the new guy showing up from the B course, the training unit, obviously is not going to have that same skill set to fill that void. And the maintenance side of the house is the same deal. You get guys who are just burnt out.
Yep.
They leave, and then there's no experience to train. And I saw it, and hopefully I think it's getting better, right? But it's not just a over the night fix. It's going to take a decade to get back up to what we were, right? Meanwhile, everything else is going on in the world. There's a lot of complex problems.
Well, and your community and the air community and stuff. I mean, what we've seen, especially in Atlanta, which is home of Delta, and you end up seeing a lot of pilots, Navy and Air Force, who tend to watch the market to see how things are going. And there are periods where demand for pilots within the commercial space creates a retention problem of people walking out the door because they can get the dream job and and all that kind of good stuff. And so then you've got to backfill. Well, you not only now have that problem, and maybe coronavirus is helping somewhat because the commercial side is not doing as well as it was, right? But if you're still not getting that fill in the pipeline, you're not creating that opportunity for the future, then we may even see downstream effects from this from the commercial space as well, because they're used to that constant revolving door, and it may start changing somewhat.
Yeah, absolutely. The dynamics, they're ever evolving. COVID is obviously a huge wrench that got thrown into the system, but it's one of those things that it plays out, I think, over the course of 5-10 years, where you see this. And when it goes back to what Paul's asking with why it kind of alluding to why we don't have fighter pilots for a multitude of reasons. But I think you can draw that all the way back to a surge in Iraq, and we're spending a lot of money on up armor, body armor, right, at the right place to go, but resources, right? So DoD says, well, we're going to do less training for fighter pilots, right? And again, this is a very simplistic version of it, but that then reared its ugly head 10 years down the road. When a guy like me, there were, I think, 13 F-16 pilots in my year group. Normally that number's around 90 or 100.
13, and it's normally 90.
So
scary.
Wow. So and those things, again,
wow,
then show, and it's a multitude of problems that, again, it takes a long time for them usually to appear, even though we know, sometimes we know it's going to happen, or people are screaming that it's going to happen, and then it happens. Now it's a crisis, and then want a Band-Aid fix, and in my opinion, it just doesn't happen. It's a long-term problem.
Yeah, peer-wise, like Navy, is it F-15 that's comparable to the 16, or what's your
nothing. But if I had to pick one, no. So we have that 15 as well in the Air Force, but the Navy they're that F-18.
F-18, that's right.
So,
yeah.
Two tails, much slower, uglier looking. I used to think the F-18 was a really good looking plane. And then you get around it after flying the F-16, and you're like, this thing's kind of ugly.
Really?
But I would still go fly it too.
Yeah.
And again, it comes down to strengths and weaknesses, right? The F-18 has some strengths that F-16 doesn't. And when it comes down to fighting in a joint fight, knowing each other's strengths and weaknesses and integrating, again, a lot of my Operation Inherent Resolve time was doing combined operations with the Navy or our coalition partners. So you got to know how to play with one another.
One time, did you ever want to go out there and just land on that football field in a rolling ocean?
People ask that, and my response is, I want to take off just once, right?
Oh yeah, that's pretty cool. But you better be ready for that too. Right?
I want to be close to shore so I can go land on shore, because when you land
catapult it off and land right.
When you land on the boat, you got to stay on the boat, right?
Right.
But yeah,
it's full of semen.
Yeah, so I want to avoid that.
Good point.
Yeah, so you could helicopter me in, put me on the deck, put me in the jet, launch. That'd be fun, and go land back on shore.
As long as it's close enough that you can land on the air runway and stuff before hitting the water, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
10,000 foot runways are my jam. not a football field.
Yeah.
It's fun talking to my Navy buddies, who are, again, they have the same issues we do. I think the Air Force does a better job of at least saying, hey, we have a fighter pilot retention problem right now.
Yeah.
The Navy also has that problem. They just don't say it, at least according to the bro level network. But it's interesting to hear them talk about their cruises and just landing on that boat. Like, to me, I can think of maybe, the 10 times in my F-16 career where my heart rate was like through the roof. A couple of those involved landing in like really squirrely weather with, heavy loads. The Navy, I mean, I feel like that's every single time.
Every time.
Like coming back like, man, I hope I land on the boat. Otherwise I'm out of gas. I mean, like it sounds terrible to me.
Yeah. Well, when you think about like the whole physics and everything that they're doing to do that, I mean, they're coming in hot because if that cable, the hook doesn't hit the cable, they got to be going at enough speed or reactionary so that aircraft, it may take a dip when it comes off the other side, but you hope that it doesn't hit the water, and that's...
Here's the thing that really got me when they were describing. So they're very precise when they come up initial for their brake. So they fly over the boat and they brake, and it's all. I mean, they're getting graded and timed every single landing. And I was talking to them, in high seas, timing the pitch of the bow, right, at the stern, whatever, port, starboard,
the
ship as it's going up and down. Obviously, it's a big deal, right? Because as you're shooting the wire, well, it's changing like 15 to 20 feet. And if you misjudge that or mistime that, the boat is rising as you're coming into land. Like the runway just rose 20 feet into the bottom of the jet. Like, I know the gear is robust, but I mean, ripping the gear, like so many bad things in my mind could happen there. It just sounds like
thrilling, right?
Yeah. Why didn't I join that? Oh, wait.
Well, let's go to that because, I mean, you're from here. You're from Peachtree City, Georgia and stuff. And if people aren't familiar with Peachtree City, it's one of these communities that was really founded off of Eastern Airlines, Delta Airlines people. And obviously these were avid golfers as well. So what they did is they started off with not just your average size neighborhood. I mean, these were large neighborhoods. And they would get 4, 6 large neighborhoods that they would put together, and then you'd have a shopping center that supports it. So you have restaurants, you have like a Target, a Kmart, a Walmart, or a grocery store. Whatever the brand name they could get in there and such. Banks. In other words, they're self-sufficient, right? And they did that 20, 40 times, John. I mean, throughout the whole Peachtree City, footprint. And then they said, you know what? We're not just going to do that. Let's make golf cart trails to connect everything together, including overpasses that go over the main roads that people drive cars on, so they could get around to connecting to their friends who may live in one of these other mega subdivision areas I've got Kmart, but I want to go to Target. So I take my golf cart and run down the golf cart trail and tootle on. And I mean, this has been going on for 40 years at least, right?
Yeah. I want to say Peachtree City, like the late 70s was like one of the first development. Like Aberdeen Village, I think, was the first one where it was built out. They call them villages, the first one. And then there's still another one that's planned to be built.
Yeah. Well, and people talk about this. I say something like, it's Peachtree City. Have you ever heard of that? And then, some people say, oh, yeah. And then other people will be like, no, what? And I'll say it's a golf cart community. Oh, yeah, we've got one of those. And it's like, no, you don't have one of these. This is not just a community. It's not just a neighborhood. This is a city, cops on golf cart. The whole thing. Yeah. You got to get your golf cart registered.
Do you ever have low speed chases?
I probably
in Peachtree City, I guarantee you they do.
Yeah.
This is just waiting for their moment on that golf cart.
So did you go to McIntosh High School then?
Stars Mill.
Okay, so that's the rivalry. Yeah. So McIntosh High School is right near downtown and everything of Peachtree City, and at least the main hub, and you go there on a school year period, like say from September to June, and you don't see cars in the parking lot, Paul. What you see is 150,000 golf carts of every shape, color, size, everything else that you could imagine. And kids don't go get their driver's license because they don't need it. I can go to Target, Walmart, the movies, I can go get food and see my friends and everything else in the golf cart. As long as you're 15, is it? Or,
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, you can drive a golf cart.
They bling them out too.
Oh, yes. They are decked out. Some of them have they all have like decked out wheels and everything. Some of them have the televisions and everything as well in the back and the stereo equipment. Oh yeah, these are rides, man.
Sounds awesome.
This is not your typical golf cart.
It falls in the realm of first world problems. Yeah, definitely in that category.
Yeah, cart maintenance.
Right. I'm a flat tire.
Cart's down.
So, and John, your dad was not a pilot, though.
He was not. Yeah, we were the first ones on the block that were not Delta.
That had to be weird, though, because I can tell you when I went to live in this area and stuff, there was a bit of status.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're not supposed to talk about this.
Yeah,
I don't think
it's unwritten. And my upbringing, I was very fortunate where I landed, right place, right time. That's the theme of my life, I feel like. But growing up in Peachtree City was phenomenal. My dad wasn't a Delta pilot, but he saw the lifestyle that Delta pilots had. Most of those in our neighborhood were ex-Air Force, ex-Navy guys, and that's what kind of initially drove me down the path towards aviation. Neighbor took me flying in a Piper Cub on like a beautiful day when I was like 13 or 14. It was a fall day, doors open, flying slow. Like the aviation hook was there. I knew I wanted to go fly after that.
Did he do a stall or anything like that with you in it?
Probably had no idea what it was at that point. But can you stall a Piper Cub? I know you can, but no, it's so slow.
My son-in-law took me up in some small aircraft, and of course he was like, he looked over and he goes, "Hey." We were on the headsets and stuff too, but he looked over and he goes, you okay with me doing some practice stuff? And I go, sure. I mean, I had no idea what the hell he's really going to do. I just figured he'd, we'd do a little maneuver to left or right or whatever. Next thing you know, the engine shut off and I'm like, whoa, hey dude, man, this sounds weird. I just hear wind and stuff. And he's like, I'm going through the whole practice here. That weirded me out.
Yeah, there's some fine print sometimes when a pilot says, hey, do you want to try this? You want to read the fine print,
So you end up going to high school there, and then you end up to Georgia Tech, of course, a university here in Atlanta, a big one, engineer university.
Not an engineer. Again, right place, right time. I was fortunate. I had my first flight on September 10th, 2001 in high school. The next day was a big catalyst that said, hey, I want to fly, and I want to fly and serve our country. I got an ROTC scholarship. Again, lucky to do that. And going to Georgia Tech, this is one of those things. I didn't really have a mentor when it came down to the details or the nitty gritty, right? I had some guys who had flown in the military, but just like me, it's been 20 years since I did ROTC. So anything I say about ROTC, just throw it out the window, right? Because it's old and outdated. But I didn't have any like real in the weeds mentorship for that. And so I thought you had to be an engineer to be a pilot. So I applied to Georgia Tech. I was going to be a civil engineer. And I showed up on day one, and I found a casual lieutenant, so a guy who just graduated and was waiting to go to pilot training. And I said, "Hey, what recommendations, what tips do you have for me?" And his only thing was get a good GPA. And I was like, "Oh, I didn't do well in calculus in high school. I'm probably not going to do well in calculus at Georgia Tech. What did you do?" And he did international affairs. So I said, I don't know what that is, but it seems like that might be a fit for me. It turns out, it worked out great. I got a good GPA. Hindsight, if I got hit in the eye with a rock or I lost a pilot slot, I don't know what I'd be doing now. Probably hungry. But it was, again, I was just fortunate, and I sought some mentorship and I had some good guidance that kept me on the path that I was seeking.
Is international affairs very, very much equivalent to somebody going to get a degree in, say, French or Spanish or something like that may not be that useful?
Yeah, I'm definitely not going to be invited back to my alma mater now. But no, it was a really good program. I actually focused on Eastern European security studies.
Oh, okay.
So there are different things you could do inside there. To me, the fall of the Soviet Union and all the ramifications of that were really fascinating. So I had some really smart professors, and we did dive down into the weeds, talking nuclear security, biological, chemical weapons, things that happened with the fall of the Soviet Union that were unplanned or unexpected, right? When country X just now appears because it's no longer a republic of the Soviet Union, but it has a chemical weapons factory, how do we contain that? What went into that? So I will say I honestly never used my degree probably whatsoever, maybe subliminally or subconsciously for my time as an F-16 pilot. But I definitely learned a little bit about the world and how the world works through it.
Yeah. We were talking earlier about F-16 and the pipeline and how you get there. And I know you spent various times, going from, getting trained yourself and then being an instructor and all of that kind of stuff. But along that path and journey, what was the attrition rate? Because I can only imagine that it's one thing for you to get to the point where you can actually get there. But then even something like, the G-force and stuff, when they put you in the room and the guys are passing out and the whole thing, and I think they make funny videos of that so that you could see those later. And
yeah, I got one.
You get to take it home,
No one looks good pulling 9 Gs.
Yeah.
No, I would say, one, I have no idea what the actual attrition rate is, and it's not exact. But there's attrition built into everything all the way up until the point, at least when I was going through, to get to introduction to fighter fundamentals.
Yeah.
So when people show up to pilot training, we know there's going to be a 15% or whatever it might be attrition rate. So a class of 30, you're going to have a couple people that wash out. And then you're going to get to introduction to fighter fundamentals. There is no planned attrition rate out of there, but it still happens. So that's the first time you're kind of learning basic tactics in a old type trainer, and then you're going to go into your weapon system, the F-16, F-15, whatever it might be. Again, when you show up there, they plan on you graduating. Actually, I take it back. IFF, Introduction to Fighter Fundamentals, there actually is a massive attrition rate. I forget what that is. But when you get to your F-16 unit or F-16 training, the plan is for you to graduate. But people do run into issues. And I've had several buddies who show up, they're tall, lanky, and for, they're not unhealthy like me with high blood pressure, and they have a really tough time pulling G's. And just, it's one of those things, a really good buddy of mine actually, he struggled with it. He never G-locked, but he had a couple episodes where he had to knock off a fight because he was losing, he was having light loss. And it came down to, he's like, hey, I want to be alive to see my kids grow up. This is probably not where I need to be. And they moved him to another plane. So there are scenarios where that ends up happening. It's kind of rare once you get to your unit that happens as well. But guys have G-lock. We've killed a decent amount of people in the F-16 specifically with G-lock. We now have auto GCAS collision avoidance system, which is saved. It saved, my buddy was the first U.S. save. A lot of our foreign nations who fly F-16s have had it for a while. We've just recently incorporated it into ours, but it's kind of down the rabbit hole of attrition rate in F-16 or into kind of any that can translate across any weapon system.
Yeah, and I mean it totally makes sense because of what you're being asked to do and the type of machine that you're being asked to drive. When you think about it, like I'm sure there's certain levels of complexity through these different things, and I would imagine you'd probably say from a C-130 or C-5 or whatever to a F-16, it's major difference. There's a lot more that goes in there. I would imagine at least that's the case.
I think so, and I know there are obviously studies that are done by this. People, I don't know how true this is, but if they redesign and did a cockpit analysis of F-16 today, it would be a 2-seat variant just because there's so much stuff going on, especially in the Wild Weasel mission, the Block 50 mission, doing suppression of any air defenses, SEED. There's just a lot that's happening. You're doing air-to-air, air-to-ground. You're looking at a multitude of sensors on 2 different displays, right? So you have to cycle between them. Meanwhile, you're flying formation with 4 other F-16s or 8, or you're integrated into a large-scale fight of 70-plus fighters. So it can get rather complex. And now that I've flown, I'm on the other side flying bigger planes from point A to point B. I think it's fair for me to say that flying the F-16 is far more complex than what I do now. Yeah, everything has its challenges, right? But there's a lot going on in that F-16 for sure.
Well, like when you were doing the air shows, you were doing a 2-seater. So is that something that they can like modify with the current setup?
So in air shows, the only time I actually flew with 2-seat was when I had someone in the back seat to give them a familiarization.
Oh, so that was the only time. It wasn't like I guess I was thinking like you brought that aircraft, you did the show with that aircraft, and then you might take somebody up as well, kind of thing, as all part of the package.
Yeah, occasionally, like I did the Super Bowl flyover, and we actually flew people in the back seat, there to get them the exposure. But for the air show, the configuration of that F-16 can change drastically. For air show, it is a clean configuration, so there's nothing hanging on the jet. It's very sleek. And it is basically just a rocket motor with fuel and a pilot sitting up there. When you go to combat, you're loading that sucker out with bombs, missiles, countermeasuring pods, targeting pods. Like it gets a little bit heavier. Mm-hmm. So the 2-seat variant, we have those. However, they're not combat coded. Back in the day, like first Gulf War, we actually have an AMRAAM kill in a D model, a 2-seat variant. But since then, we don't take it because it's a limb fact because of gas. When you put that second seat in there, you have to give up something because it's essentially the same plane. So what do you remove? Gas, and then you also take extra air away from the pilot up front. That's what I say. But no.
So that's why you go into high G and knock the guy in the back out. Yeah.
The air show piece. I think I flew 80 plus people in the back seat.
Yeah.
And that's allowing the maintainers, the people who really make it happen. They're the ones that are humping it, fixing the motor, fixing all the stuff that I broke, doing the demo, putting in the extra hours. It's to give them, it's a reward with air quotes, to go ride in the back seat. And
when they get out, do you give them little wings and everything like they do in the airline?
I guess I wasn't so kind. That's all. Try to go rip their face off,
make them puke or
laugh about it. Yeah, right. Make them puke and then say, hey, good job.
Here's your wings.
Yeah, here's your wings. Yeah, dang. I missed an opportunity there.
Totally. You wanted to ask a question somewhere about the A-10, and I don't remember what it was.
Yeah, how does the A-10, like what's our go-to CAS platform now?
Well, it depends. So on what the environment is. When I was there for Operation Inherent Resolve, the F-16 for most of it, or F-15Es, because the ability to move large distances very fast. I mean, you can attest, right? Like you want to see an A-10 show up overhead if you're in it, I would imagine. But for, and it goes back and forth again, but like Afghanistan for a while, it was only F-16s in theater because you needed the ability to go from the southern part of the country to the northern part of the country in 20 minutes versus an A-10 in 4 days and 32 minutes, But that gun, I mean, it just destroys everything.
Yeah. So it's the armament, really. It's the weapons capability that really makes the A-10 suitable for CAS. The
gun, obviously, it's built around the gun. We're carrying essentially the same, bombs, right, when it comes down to it. But the A-10, if you look at an F-16 strafing, what it's called Zorroing the target. Yeah. So you roll in on a target doing a high angle strafe, there's a decent chance that you're going to Zorro the target, right? You're going to draw a Z or something because when you squeeze the trigger, it's loud, can't see. You're also probably starting around 350 knots and you're accelerating out past 400 and something knots. But there's a flight control logic that changes in that, right? So you're like, I know what the feel is. The F-16 side stick doesn't move. It moves about 1/8 of an inch, right? So different than so it's all pressure. Yeah. So I'd say it's tough. The A-10, however, as it's rolling in down the chute, its flight controls lock out. So when it points at it, it's going to shoot whatever it points at. So it's pretty cool. And then it's also slower going down the chute, as we call it, and it can strafe twice. An F-16, if you're going 450 knots, you don't have a whole lot of time on final to, one, acquire the target, put the thing on the target, shoot the target, and then escape off the target.
You're not putting as much lead on target.
Yeah. A-10's got like 900 something. Yeah. And it's also shooting a water bottle too, right?
Yeah.
That 30 millimeter. It's impressive. I want to shoot the gun.
I think everybody wants to go shoot the gun.
But then I want to fly fast.
I just want to watch you shoot the gun.
Yeah.
Come cast me, dude.
Yeah.
Have you had a lot of guys that's on your show that flew the A-10? Because I hear this on occasion of ground crew guys finally get to meet those guys who did the gun runs for them, and it's pretty wild. I don't know. I think did you get a chance to do that, or was it the Apache? I can't remember.
No, I got to fly in a AC-130.
Oh,
on a mission.
That's right.
We didn't shoot, and apparently, if you go out on an AC-130 and you don't get to shoot a test fire or live, when you come back, the crew's supposed to ball you up. But there were only 6 of them, and it was me and my Ranger buddy, so they decided not to.
6 of them.
They suggested it. They said, normally this is what happens. And I said, well hey, if you want to be embarrassed by the Army,
proceed.
And the corporal that was with me was like 6'2", 250, and he was just grinning ear to ear because he lived for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we're going to go back and be an Air Force over here ourselves.
And they're like, we're going to pass on that one this time. I'm like, that's a good idea. Thanks for the ride. But that was cool, being able to see all the sensors. And it actually we were flying over Charlie Company, which I had deployed with a couple years before. And so it was cool to see the mission from up there and see how the sensors work and what their fidelity was and how much they could really pick out on the ground. And it was better than I thought it would be in some cases. And they couldn't see some things that I kind of expected that they would be able to. And so their ability to decipher that IR and that thermal and figure out what's going on the ground was pretty impressive. Yeah, but it was awesome.
Because you talked about being on the opposite end of that, of being a sniper, and them misinterpreting what you were doing there.
Yeah, an AC-130 that was supporting us was like, hey, you got a guy, he's outside of your blocking positions. And I was like listening, and they gave like a bearing, and I was like, that's me.
That's me.
That's me. I'm one of you guys.
Yeah, see me wave my hand. Hello.
That's terrifying. I think the coolest thing about the AC-130 though was the gun bunnies that got to run the guns, because everybody else is they're flyboys,
right?
And
these are just
you're talking to a flyboy there.
Yeah. Well,
it's a different breed, and you go and they got these gun bunnies, man. They're just these 2 young kids, 2 specialists. They're like, we got the greatest job in the world, and we're flying around with a 40 millimeter machine gun. I don't know, it was cool.
I think if you're on the if you're on the ground, having that AC-130 overhead has got to be a warm fuzzy.
Oh yeah,
like just orbiting. I think my favorite 9-line I ever got was up in northern Iraq, and there's an AC-130 in the stack, and they were just laying waste to everything down there. And they wanted 1 500-pounder, and the mark in the 9-line is always NA.
Yeah,
but this one was Spooky's mark.
Yeah,
and like you call contact, and it's just 30 millimeter, just destroying this tank. And I'm like, I think I see it.
Yeah, you're not going to miss that one.
I think it's gone, but if you want a bomb, and you can have a bomb too.
Anything worth blowing up is worth blowing up twice. Yeah. I mean, if you're going to drop ordnance.
Right. So did you get to release it?
We did, yeah. No? Yeah. No, that was a good sortie, It was pretty, all those things. I mean, it's always good, right? Again, I joined, right, is to help the guys and gals out on the ground. So when you can affect the fight, and hopefully when we're showing up, you're turning the tide if it's one of those type scenarios. And I think that night we definitely did. We were pretty busy. I think we came home pretty light.
Yeah.
After it was all said and done.
What did you hear from those guys who did get the opportunity to meet the ground guys afterwards and stuff?
I think,
or at least at some point afterwards.
Yeah, it's one of those that if you get to meet the guys, I've never had that opportunity. I think everyone is incredibly humbled by it, right? Because you realize it's easy to disconnect relative when you're at 25,000 feet or 20,000 feet. Like you feel it through the radio, right? And you know guys are in trouble, so you want to do everything humanly possible to help out, right? But at the end of the day, you're still separated by 20,000 feet, and you go back home. Like it absolutely weighs on you. But when a good buddy who got a distinguished flying cross for saving a bunch of dudes in a place, and it was, he was just crying when they were reading the citation, right? Because he got to meet those guys. One of them said, he got to come home to his newborn son, right? Because those guys, they were in the fight for their life, right? And I think that's what it's all about. Is when it can come down to you can effectively turn the tide of a fight to hopefully let guys go home to see their loved ones. Like it doesn't get any better. I'm actually, my one story, which doesn't compare to that, is I'm going to record a podcast on Friday with an A-10 guy who actually, he lost his canopy and his gear. And we were texting back and forth. And he's like, hey, I think you were flying in OIR at the same time I was. Turns out we high five. We miss each other. Where his unit was showing up as my unit was leaving. But my second to last sortie, it was a really busy deployment, as I mentioned, fighting ISIS. But my second to last sortie for me was one, the heart rate was through the roof. We came off the tanker, and our call sign was Weasel. So we peel off the tanker and we check in with the controlling agency. And an A-10 here's our Weasel call sign. And his first thing is like, hey, Weasel, I'm bullseye XYZ, so giving us his position. He's like, I just lost my motor. I'm going to get out the jet. So we turn and we just haul as fast as we can. His wingman, he was on the tanker, threw a fan blade through the motor.
Oh, wow.
Right at the end of getting gas. His wingman was critically low on gas, getting ready to get onto the tanker. So his wingman has to jettison all his stores, get rid of all his bombs. And they start turning and pointing to Al-Assad, which this time, that used to be a base we had a pool at, right? We set tankers at. And the week before, I was dropping bombs right outside the wire of Al-Assad. So not a friendly place anymore. And so, you hear that. I mean, this guy is going to jump out of the jet. So we turned and we went as fast as we could to get down there. And kind of the humorous part of it is I was the wingman and I said, hey, you want me to switch over to the JTAC because there's a restricted operating zone there. I can switch over to the JTAC and see if there's any rotary wing or if there's anyone, in the area. I check in and there's a French Mirage on the frequency who was just throwing up on the radio. He's just like talking about a road scan he's doing. And like, I cannot get him off the radio to like talk to the JTAC and say, hey, dude, you have hog flight that he's probably going to punch out in your AOR and it's going to be bad. The fortunate thing is he limped that jet into Al-Assad. His wingman landed right behind him. It turns out like my flight lead, Flint Locke, he was doing a rotation a few weeks later at our Combined Air Operations Center doing staff work and got to meet that A-10 pilot, right? But at that time, it doesn't compare to someone who's like, for the A-10 pilot, significant emotional event. It was a significant emotional event for me. It ended the best way it could have, but that was a time if he'd punched out there, it wouldn't have gone well. Like we had a deployment, we had a Jordanian pilot that I mission planned with the day before. He went down and he ended up on the news, not the way you want it to be, right? So public execution, and it's just, in the end of the day, this is a dangerous business. Someone like has to do it. When you sign up for it, you're signing, your life away, right? And it's going to be, to sacrifice for the person next to you. You're going to do whatever you can so that they can go home. But in the end of the day, hopefully everyone gets to come home, but that's definitely not the case.
Yeah. And I think you talk about signing up so you can support the guys on the ground. Hopefully you did it. And I think it's fun to razz each other. We all do it. But I know for a fact, like we could not get to the places we got to without the stack we had above us. And obviously, we need aircraft to get there in the first place, but
everybody had a role, though. Like, and we talked about this on one episode about what Rangers do versus, MARSOC versus SEALs versus whatever. The same thing goes to conventional Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, air guys versus ground guys. Everybody's doing something to make the magic happen.
Well, sometimes the guys on the ground, they're like, well, I'm the guy on the ground, and you think like you're a badass, but as a sniper, like your job's like watching, communicating, things like that. The thing that makes me really, really awesome is I have a magic button on my chest and I press it and I'm talking to a jet, and the guys I'm fighting with, they don't know if that's, Goose and Maverick up there, so just doing a flyover, they're like, holy shit. Cause those guys have seen that movie too. The bad guys have seen that. They're like, this is not going to be good. They're going to invert and mess me up. So
they have it on VHS.
Yeah, exactly. No, I got DVDs, shitty ones. But just doing a show of force.
Yeah,
that's enough to turn the tide. I think to the people listening that haven't served, you assume that you're winning by these large margins, and it's not. The Patriots versus the Falcons.
Yeah,
it's like the Olympics. You're winning by a fraction of a second. It's by thousands. And just the presence of a helicopter or a jet or whatever it is, that's enough. Even if it's an RD unit, doing a test fire, close enough that your area of operations is going to know, okay, these guys have, HIMARS on station. Like that's something to consider. That's sometimes enough to be able to walk in, get your target, and walk out, and then you don't have to get into a gunfight. So,
yeah, it's and it's one of those. It's not given, right? And that's what we were talking earlier about near peers and things like that, and getting ready for the next fight, because it's not a given that we'll win. I mean, it's margins, right? And we obviously have very capable and very well-trained people and great equipment, but the bad guys do too. And I mean, a great, I think, way to look at it, at least at a very like unclassified rudimentary level, if you just look at what ISIS was able to accomplish in their PR department, right? Like they put some like high level videos, right? And then they translate to their fighting. But they're capable. They're capable fighters, capable individuals.
Yeah.
And that's a very primitive look at it, but I think it translates across the spectrum.
Yeah.
Yeah. You look at their level of technological sophistication and you think, okay, but I know the guys that went there and fought them, and it wasn't an easy fight.
Yeah.
And you extrapolate that to a sophisticated enemy. And the other thing is like, what margin are you going to win by? Like there's no given that you're going to win, but even if you do, what's it going to cost you?
Yeah.
And I think people forget that. Like good enough isn't good enough when it comes to
when you have
air superiority.
Yeah, Americans coming home in body bags. If you talk to Air Peace alone, could you imagine World War II, right? When you send up 70 aircraft, right, with like 12 individuals on it, and 20 of them didn't come home. Like today, if we have a couple mishaps and we lose a couple airplanes, like the Air Force, like we like pause. I mean, granted training, but like pause. What's going on here? Like, in the World War II spin up, I mean, in the training base, you have like 4 crashes a day. You're like, that's fine. Just bulldoze it off and keep going. But it's a different dynamic if people are expecting, we've always won. And yeah, sure, a couple of people die, but yeah, that's not always going to be the case, especially I think if you are talking to a near peer.
Yeah, God forbid that ever happens.
Yeah,
but
hopefully it doesn't.
I think that's kind of lost on people, that it's not outside the realm of possibility. But that might be a different conversation.
Yeah. It's interesting times, but it's so easy to forget, I think, and really lose track of what's going on in the world, and getting wrapped up. Like we live in a world of first world problems, like in the United States, at least in my opinion. And there are definitely significant problems, right? But no one worries about, for the most part, where am I going to get fresh drinking water? Yeah. I'm not, again, I sleep at night and I'm not worried about someone kicking the door down and dragging me and my family out because they disagree with my bloodline or my views, like you go, like I know you guys can attest, like you go to a lot of countries in the world, that is not a guarantee. And if you lip off on social media or to even your neighbor, right, then people are going to show up in the middle of the night and take you away. Like we don't have to worry about that. We live in a pretty good country.
Yeah. Well, even just natural things. And there's a lot of people that are still at the mercy of nature. And a flood came through or some other event happened, and now they're cut off from groceries from outside of their area, and they're back to getting water where they can. Yeah. And it's tenuous, but it's very tenuous that we have all of these things. It doesn't take much. I think that's what people don't understand. It takes a lot to make the infrastructure, but it's the snap of your fingers, and things aren't available anymore. Imagine if you had a catastrophe at your at wherever you're getting your water from, and then you have something like coronavirus and you can't go get bottled water. I mean, I live in New York and we had E. coli in my city's water. So you couldn't drink the water, but we could go to the store. But if that had happened in the middle of lockdown, well,
it'd been over.
Yeah. I mean, people are going to suffer.
Look how we reacted with toilet paper.
Oh my gosh,
right?
It's crazy.
Could you imagine if it was something as a necessity such as water?
Yeah. That's
not just toilet paper missing, but then when you got to go get something that you're not used to, like Scott's or Kirkland's or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. Yeah. But no, I'm not actually, because it was funny.
There are
because
people that were complaining about things like that.
I know they are.
Their favorite kind of bacon or their favorite kind of.
Yeah. It's like, damn it. I went down there and, blah, blah, blah wasn't there. And it's like, okay. And
yeah, we forget these things.
We have become a country that is very comfortable with that, and it usually takes major catastrophes that we would probably equate to like hurricanes, something of that nature, earthquakes that, you know, we see usually at a distance. We see, oh, I feel really bad for Puerto Rico, for you know, South Florida, for, you know, whatever, New Orleans, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But imagine that at a massive scale. And it's not isolated, and it is affecting your bubble on a daily basis.
It's really easy. Yeah, it's easy when it's at your fingertips on your phone that you're just watching it to detach, right? It comes back to the same thing when you're at 20,000 feet.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you can detach somewhat from it. But you talk, it was 2005, the tsunamis, right? And granted, it was spread across multiple countries, but it was like 300,000 people. I mean, that just obviously life-altering natural disaster, and that's only a natural disaster. So we're down the rabbit hole with this, but again, when it comes to it, it's like we live in a really good country with a lot of freedoms. That it is a slippery slope, and it can go away just at the snap of a finger. And there's got to be people that are willing to step up and answer the call. Like for me, you know, I think it was easy. It was 9/11, right? But people are joining and serving now who were born after 9/11, and now it's a history lesson, probably in 7th or 8th grade, right? It's not, they weren't sitting there watching.
It was younger than that. John, we've got people joining the military now that were born at 9/11.
Yeah, and that's what comes, I need to go back to the propensity. Like, why, I don't know, why does someone join and serve? How do we get people to join and serve? You know, maybe, obviously we have patriots, right? Like, I think if you took a knife and dug it apart, and like, mine would be tied to patriotism and why I joined, right? Yeah. There's job security and things like that, but you know, if we're selling job security and benefits, like, who is the military competing against?
Right now with coronavirus, it should be rather good.
You'd think.
Yeah. You'd think that, hey, the government's hiring. Hey, come on. You know,
it's interesting dynamics.
Yeah. But there's a lot of catching up to do on that side of things. I mean, we want a more professional soldier. We want them to stay longer. We expect more of them. The equipment and leadership and everything is more sophisticated. But we're still, you know, you go to basic training and you're still treated like a draftee was in Vietnam, the go to war, go to jail guys. Not to the same extent, but it's still rooted in that. So the culture hasn't caught up. Yeah. So why would you go and have this huge expectation, this huge responsibility, and then you get treated like you should be digging ditches?
You know, it's funny you say that, and this is a generalized statement, right? But I did have experiences, and one F-16 pilot in particular, who he was counseled multiple times, but like, obviously there's an officer enlisted relationship, and that hails back, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years, right? But like, our enlisted force, specifically in the Air Force, has never been more educated. And I can say, you know, my air show time was phenomenal. And the reason it was phenomenal because it was fun, but I had a team of 10 maintainers we were a team. Like, we were removed from everyone else on base. We had our own building, we had our own jets, and we operated to get the mission done. And they were tied. For them, they saw the mission impact right away, right? Because it was in front of their face when I took off and flew. If I didn't fly and the jet broke, they took that personally, versus the jet takes off and flies away for 40, it takes 40 minutes to get to where it's going. It's gone for 3 hours and comes back, like, pilot hops out and leaves. So there's like ownership that's tied to it. But those guys were some of the most phenomenal human beings that I know, very smart, very talented. And I would have failed, I think, as a leader, right? I looked at them as peers, right? Mm-hmm. They're obviously, I was the guy in charge on paper, right? But it was a team effort and a team decision when it came down to a lot of things, because again, they're really well educated. So our system, like, there is a time and a place, probably like, go take the hill. Sure. Well, that's going to suck. I don't want to do that. But, you know, you're competing against industries and stuff where kids who don't have their driver's license that's a whole nother thing. You know, they can, I can go do this. I don't have to do PT. I don't have to, I can smoke weed, whatever it is, and have all these freedoms. Like, you're sacrificing going to the military. You're giving up freedoms But that's a tough thing to compete against. I feel like in today's world now.
Oh, it definitely is, especially with the changing environment. I mean, I think that there is probably a little bit more realization that, I mean, I was a bit shocked. I'll be the first to admit, when you sign up and you swear to defend the Constitution, and yet the Constitution, you got UCMJ that overrides it. So, you lose, like you said, those freedoms and some of those things that you're supporting or defending in your own. And so, yeah, people wise up and go, I don't know that I want to do that. And it does go back to that culture that I experienced, and people before me experienced a lot, in that, you didn't necessarily say you were a veteran or you served or anything like that because you weren't revered.
Yeah.
You obviously were too dumb. You couldn't get a job. You almost were going to jail, and you had a choice: go to jail or go to the military. And that was the mindset that was of a generation, and before. And now it seems like veterans are held, we just had Veterans Day and everything, and I see some veterans who say stuff like, I don't know why we even have this day. Well, embrace it. I mean, embrace the fact that people out there are willing to offer discounts or whatever to veterans, and they want to say thank you, and that's the way they sincerely want to do that. But I get the I understand why some people say that. And their concern is that it's becoming too marketable. We've turned into stores are doing this, and it's buy mattresses, and it has nothing to do with Veterans Day. It's an opportunity.
Yeah, like it's lost its meaning or whatever.
And I get that.
Sure.
But I think we need to also understand that we've come a long ways as well. I don't want to see us go back to that because of generations today not appreciating and understanding, because it could quickly turn on a dime.
Well, and if we do go back, you're talking about the impetus to serve. It's like, for me, it wasn't so much patriotism. Obviously, I love my country, but I grew up on like Vietnam movies and stuff like that. And they like to highlight the bad things that happened and the negative things that soldiers did. And then you get a little older and you're like, well, it's, these massacres happen, or these war crimes or atrocities happen because you're sending people that you were supposed to send to jail.
Right.
And there are powers that are greater than me. This war is going to happen anyway. If I know I'm not going to commit any atrocities or stand for that, and you're not going to either, so I better go, because they're going to send somebody.
Right.
And he may not be suited in his character or whatever, and then something bad is going to happen to somebody who's caught in the middle of this conflict. So, I've had that conversation with other people. They're like, well, why would I go? I'm smart, young, I have options, but I have this drive, and I don't know where to answer these questions. And they're not particularly patriotic, although they may love their country. I'm like, well, if you don't go, then somebody else will go.
Yeah.
And they're not going to have the same ethics or morals. Or they'll send somebody that doesn't want to be there, and that's going to come out the wrong way.
This goes back to the challenge that you were talking about, in recruiting for the Air Force, and trying to find not just the right people when you start narrowing it down for being able to pass an ASVAB, being able to make it through the MEPS and the physical, being able to have, no charges or anything against them, being able to, meet certain standards and everything else. And then you're trying to get that small percentage of individuals that might even go on and do something even more extreme, whether it could be flying and being a pilot or going into the soft community or doing whatever. The numbers start going down and down and down. And it's an interesting time. And I think, personally, from being a former recruiter, I can only feel that this is probably going to be, we're at a crossroads here right now where, this could be one of these things, like I said, hey, the doors are open, we're hiring.
Right.
Or this could get really ugly. And from a country standpoint, that's pretty scary,
Yeah, we need smart young men and women to join and serve. Paul, is interesting, perspective. I haven't thought of that way. Like, well, if you're smart and capable, if you don't do it, then knucklehead over here, he's going to take your spot. It's fascinating. I actually, before I went into commercial aviation, I was really pursuing the business path. But the amount of guys that I talked to who are in business, like former SOF, there are a couple former fighter pilots, like it's just not a path most pilots take. Usually go commercial aviation. But it comes down to it. I feel like there's so many smart young men and women that go through the military, and it's a great system to give you a huge new bag of tools to take out and then go into the private sector and conquer.
Yeah.
Because all the guys I was talking to in some very high spots at various businesses, they're all like former Green Berets and things, but they're like, obviously they were sharp to do the mission they were doing. And then they just took that skill set and it was learning a new language and just went out and crushed it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would agree. And then, you look back at the Greatest Generation. I mean, a lot of those, they did the exact same thing. They returned from the war. They started up businesses. They became highly successful. And a lot of them, you never knew that they even served within the military, but they took that tool set with them. And it's going to be up to us to help market that or help present that. John, we could probably go on again, for this whole thing. And I hope that we do get a chance to do that because, we are very like-minded in what we're doing in our podcast and how we're bringing guests on to tell their stories and all of that. But I appreciate you taking time out at least to come down here and share your story.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it. I look forward to the next time. And then when you come on the Afterburn and we'll talk even more.
Sounds good.
We good.
I like it.
Yeah.